He quit on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray February morning when the sky forgets to choose between rain and snow and settles for both. No argument, no dramatic exit, no demand for anything. Just a single email, 11 words long, effective immediately. I am resigning my position. Thank you. Nathan Cole, the CEO of Vantex Consulting, didn't notice. She was on a call with Singapore. She would notice 3 weeks later. By then, everything would be different. Nathan Cole was 37 years old and looked, according to his youngest daughter, like the kind of dad who could fix anything but never fixes himself. She was 6. Her name was Rosie, and she said things like that constantly, with no awareness of how deeply they landed. He had 2 other children. Caleb was 11, old enough to understand that their life was smaller than most of his classmates' lives, and young enough to still believe his father was extraordinary for the way he flipped pancakes on Saturday mornings left-handed, without looking, while simultaneously helping Rosie find her other shoe. Lily was 9. The middle child, the quiet observer, who had her mother's dark eyes and her father's habit of watching a room before entering it. Their mother, Diane, had died 3 years ago. An aneurysm. There was no warning, no build-up, no cinematic goodbye. She was there in the morning making coffee, and she was gone by noon. Nathan had been in a meeting when his phone rang. He still couldn't remember driving to the hospital. He remembered the parking garage, and then the hallway, and then a doctor who was very kind but whose words arrived in the wrong order. Grief doesn't have a shape. That was what Nathan learned in the years that followed. People talked about it like it was a tunnel you walked through, but it was more like weather. It didn't end. It just changed. You learned to carry an umbrella. He had quit his senior analyst position at a hedge fund 6 months after Diane died. The hours were incompatible with being the only person who could pick up 3 children from 3 different schools. He'd taken a job at Vantex Consulting, a deliberate step down, a calculated sacrifice. The role was in the financial modeling division, technically beneath his qualifications, but it had a fixed exit time of 5:30 and a boss who didn't care what he did as long as the spreadsheets were correct. The spreadsheets were always correct. Nathan had a gift, not the loud kind that gets noticed in meetings, but the rare, quiet kind that holds organizations together without fanfare. He understood numbers the way some people understand music. Not just the notes, but the spaces between them. He had, in a previous life, co-founded a fintech startup, taken it through 2 funding rounds, and then sold his stake quietly and without announcement when Diane was diagnosed with a condition that, at the time, everyone thought was manageable. He didn't tell anyone at Vantex any of this. He answered emails. He attended meetings. He sat in the 3rd row from the back and said things only when he was certain they were worth saying. His colleagues thought he was shy. His direct supervisor, a man named Greg Paulson, thought he was a solid contributor but not leadership material. Victoria Harlan, CEO of Vantex Consulting, had never, in 3 years, learned his last name. It happened on a Wednesday, which was the kind of day that should not have the power to change things, but sometimes does. Vantex had landed a major restructuring contract with a regional bank called Meridian Trust. The analysis had been assigned to a team led by a senior consultant named Derek Shaughnessy, confident, well-dressed, the kind of man who had a firm handshake and a habit of repeating other people's ideas slightly louder and attributing them to himself. Nathan had flagged an error in the preliminary model 2 weeks earlier. He'd sent Derek a memo, then a follow-up email, then mentioned it quietly at the end of a team check-in. Each time, Derek had nodded with the expression of a man who was not listening. The presentation was scheduled for 9 a.m. The Meridian Trust executives flew in from Philadelphia. There were catered pastries and a conference room on the 32nd floor with a view of the river. Victoria Harlan arrived at 8:55, took the seat at the head of the table, and did not look at the 3rd row. The model error surfaced 12 minutes into the presentation. One of the bank's analysts, a sharp, Unsmiling woman named Constance Park raised her hand and asked why the projected cash flow figures in year 3 assumed a flat interest rate environment when the underlying assumptions in Section 4 explicitly modeled rate volatility. The room went quiet. Derek Shaughnessy said, "That's a great catch. We'll look into that." Then he looked at Nathan. "Cole," he said, though he usually called him "Hey, man," because he had never fully committed to learning Nathan's name either. "Didn't you sign off on Section 4? Nathan had not signed off on Section 4. He had flagged its error. He had documentation of 3 separate attempts to correct it. He opened his mouth. "Mr. Cole," Victoria said, and her voice was not unkind, but it was definitive. "We'll circle back on accountability after the presentation. For now, I flagged this," Nathan said. Quietly, not angrily, just clearly. February 9th. I have the email thread. Victoria looked at him for the first time. Really looked. The way you look at someone when you realize you've been walking past them for years without registering their face. "We'll discuss it later," she said. They did not discuss it later. The meeting with Meridian Trust ended uncomfortably. Derek gave a brief mea culpa that managed to imply collective responsibility. Victoria's assistant sent a calendar invite for an internal review that Nathan was not included on. He packed his desk at 4:45. There wasn't much to pack: a coffee mug, a photograph of Diane and the kids at the beach, a small succulent that Rosie had given him because she said plants made people less lonely. He took the photograph. He left the succulent for whoever came next. He sent the email from the elevator. "Effective immediately, I am resigning my position. Thank you. Nathan Cole." He picked up Rosie from school at 5:03. She showed him a drawing she'd made of their cat, a gray tabby named Professor. The drawing was mostly a circle with ears and 4 lines for legs. Nathan told her it was extraordinary. He meant it. He did not tell his children that he had quit his job. He cooked pasta with the sauce Diane used to make: olive oil, garlic, cherry tomatoes. They ate at the kitchen table with the overhead light that he kept meaning to replace because it flickered on the left side. Caleb talked about a history project. Lily showed him 3 paragraphs she'd written for English. Rosie fell asleep before dessert, her cheek on the table, her hand still loosely holding a fork. Nathan sat for a long time after the children were in bed. The house was the kind of quiet that only exists when you've built something worth being quiet for. He thought about money, briefly and practically. The way he thought about most problems, with a clear eye and no flinching. He had 6 months of runway. He would figure something out. He always figured something out. He did not think about Victoria Harlan. He did not know that she was, at that exact moment, thinking about him. The Meridian Trust contract had a deadline of March 15th. Vantex's team had 3 weeks to deliver a complete restructuring analysis. On the morning of February 28th, a junior analyst named Sophie Tremblay sent an urgent message to Greg Paulson. The master financial model had a cascading error in the interest rate assumptions that invalidated 3 of the 7 core projections. Greg Paulson looked at the model for 40 minutes, then called his deputy. The deputy looked at it for an hour and called the head of quantitative analysis. The head of quantitative analysis looked at it and said, with genuine bewilderment, that he wasn't sure how the original validation team had cleared it. Victoria Harlan was briefed at 2:15 p.m. She sat through the explanation without interrupting, which was how her team knew she was genuinely alarmed. When she interrupted, it meant she was in control. Silence meant the situation was outside the perimeter of her management. "Who built the original model architecture?" she asked. Sophie Tremblay, who had done her research, said, "Nathan Cole. He redesigned the base template 2 years ago. We've been running on his version since." There was a pause. "Get me his file." Victoria had read personnel files before, hundreds of them. In the clinical way that executives consume information, scanning for relevant data, filing the rest. Nathan Cole's file was different. The relevant data kept expanding. Former co-founder and COO of Bridge Financial Technologies, a fintech startup that had built proprietary risk modeling software and sold its core IP to a mid-size investment bank for $42 million in 2018. Prior to that, Goldman Sachs, 5 years, Quantitative Strategies Division, an academic record that included a master's degree in financial mathematics from MIT. He had been at Vantex for 3 years in a role that paid $112,000 a year, doing work that a competent analyst could have done for $70,000. Victoria read the file twice. Then she read the email chain that Greg Paulson had forwarded, the chain in which Nathan had flagged the Section 4 error on February 9th, followed up on the 14th, mentioned it again on the 21st. 3 attempts, documented in detail, each one professional and precise and completely ignored. She thought about the meeting, about the look on his face, not defensive, not angry, just clear. The way someone looks when they're saying something for the 4th time to someone who has spent 3 tries demonstrating they won't listen. She thought about how she had said, "We'll discuss it later," and how they had not. She had Greg pull his resignation notice. 11 words. No explanation. No anger. Just a clean, quiet exit. Pull up his contact information, she told her assistant. His personal number. He may not want to take your call, the assistant said. She was very good at her job partly because she said things like this. "I know," Victoria said. "Pull it up anyway." She drove herself. This was not a small decision. Victoria Harlan had not driven herself to a destination that was not a grocery store or a gym in approximately 4 years. She had a car, a black Audi that she'd purchased and rarely used, and she had a driver named Terrence, whom she called on late nights and early mornings. But she didn't want Terrence for this. She wasn't sure why, but she suspected it had something to do with the fact that she didn't yet know what this was, and having a witness to things you don't yet understand felt premature. Nathan's address was in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from the Vantex offices. The houses were modest without being small. The lawns were the kind that got mowed every 2 weeks rather than every one, and the streetlights were the older, amber type that gave everything the quality of a photograph taken slightly before your time. She sat in the parked car for a moment. She was not a person who sat in parked cars. She was a person who moved efficiently between destinations. She pulled her coat tighter and got out. The porch light was on. From inside, she could hear the sound of children, not chaos, but the specific texture of an evening winding down. Something on television at low volume, a small voice calling out something about a blanket. She knocked. A girl opened the door. She was perhaps 6 years old, with dark hair in 2 uneven pigtails and her father's watchful brown eyes. She was wearing pajamas with small foxes on them. She looked at Victoria with the particular directness that belongs only to small children and very experienced negotiators. "Hi," she said. "Hello?" Victoria said. "Is your dad home? Are you from his work?" "I was." The girl considered this. "He quit his work." "I know. Then why are you here?" Victoria did not have a good answer. "Is he home?" "Rosie." A boy appeared behind the girl, older, perhaps 11, with the careful expression of a child who has been the responsible one long enough that it has become his default. He looked at Victoria and made a rapid assessment. "Dad," he called, without removing his eyes from the visitor. "Someone's at the door." Nathan appeared from the kitchen. He was wearing a dark green sweater, the sleeves pushed up, holding a dish towel. He looked at Victoria in the particular way that people look at things that belong in one context, appearing in another. The slight recalibration. The pause before the world makes sense again. Then his face settled. Not into warmth, not into coldness. Into the same expression he'd worn in the conference room, measured and clear. "Miss Harlan," he said. "Nathan?" she said, and then stopped, because she had not decided how to say the next part. There was a framed photograph on the wall behind him, visible from the doorway. a woman with dark hair and a laugh that the camera had managed to catch full and unguarded, the kind of laugh that doesn't perform itself. Beside her, a younger version of the boy in the doorway, and a small girl who must have been the one who had just answered the door, and in the woman's arms, an infant. Victoria recognized, with an uncomfortable precision, that she was looking at a life. "You'd better come in," Nathan said. Caleb took Rosie upstairs without being asked. Victoria would note this later, the efficiency of it, the quiet competence, the way the boy had read the room and made the right call without being told. She sat at a kitchen table that had a small gouge in one corner and a crayon mark on the edge that had been partially scrubbed away. Nathan made coffee. He made it without asking if she wanted any, which she appreciated more than she expected to. She had spent the drive rehearsing an opening, a clean professional framing. "We have a situation with the Meridian Trust model, and I believe your expertise is relevant." She had practiced it until it sounded like something a CEO would say, rather than an apology wearing a business case as clothing. He set a mug in front of her and sat across the table and looked at her with the expression of a man who was willing to give her as much time as she needed to say whatever she had come to say. She said the professional version. She laid out the model error, the timeline, the exposure, the 3 weeks remaining before the Meridian Trust deadline. She was precise and she was thorough, and she watched his face as she spoke. He was listening. Genuinely listening, the way that some people listen when they find the problem interesting, regardless of whether they have any obligation to care about it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "It's an iterative error in the rate shock assumptions," he said. "The model treats each scenario as independent, but the cash flow projections carry forward the previous scenario's terminal values. It compounds in year 3 because that's when the reinvestment assumptions reset. Can it be fixed? Yes. In 3 weeks? In about 4 hours, if the underlying data is clean. The fix is structural but not complicated. Your team could do it if someone walked them through it." Victoria looked at him. "I came here to ask you to come back." Something shifted in his face very slightly, like weather changing at a great distance. "I know," he said. "I'll increase your compensation. I can offer you senior consultant, or we can discuss an analyst director role with the right terms. Whatever you think is, it's not about the title. I understand. I read your file." He didn't react to this the way she'd expected. He simply looked at her. "I know what you gave up to take the position you took at Vantex," she said. "And I know why. And I know that I treated you." She stopped, started again. "I should not have allowed Derek to." "You didn't allow it," he said. "You just didn't stop it." "Yes." He picked up his coffee mug. "Put it down." Looked at the table, then at her. "I don't need an apology, Miss Harlan. I need to not be in rooms where I say something 4 times and the 4th time is still optional." She felt something in that sentence, not the sting of it, which she deserved, but the precision. It wasn't a complaint. It was a specification. This was a man who had decided, with the same methodical care he applied to financial models, what he required in order to operate at full capacity. "What would it take," she said slowly, "to make a room where that doesn't happen?" He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a different question than the one you came here to ask." "I know." From upstairs, there was the sound of small footsteps and a voice, Rosie's voice, asking something about a glass of water. Nathan's face changed in the instant he heard it. Not dramatically, not even visibly to someone who wasn't looking closely. But Victoria was looking closely. The focus that had been trained entirely on the conversation shifted, briefly and completely. Toward the ceiling, toward the sound, toward whatever small need had just been announced from the floor above. He excused himself. He went upstairs. She heard his voice, low and unhurried, and then Rosie's voice asking something, and then laughter, just a quick flash of it, Rosie's high and his lower underneath. He came back 3 minutes later and sat down. "Sorry," he said. "Don't apologize," she said. She meant it. He did not go back to Vantex. He made that clear before she left that night politely, without animosity. The way you decline something that you have genuinely considered and genuinely decided against. But the Meridian Trust problem was real, and it was solvable. And Nathan Cole was not the kind of person who left a fixable problem alone when 3 weeks and a significant client relationship were on the line. "I'll look at the model," he said. "Send me access. I'll walk your team through the fix remotely. I'm not doing it as an employee." As what, then? As someone who built the model in the first place and would prefer it didn't fail. Victoria had her assistant send him the necessary credentials that night. He sent his first set of annotations at 11:45 p.m., a 20-page document, methodical and clear, that identified the structural flaw, its cascading effects, and a step-by-step correction pathway. Sophie Tremblay called Victoria at 7 the next morning. "This is the most comprehensive diagnostic I've ever seen," she said. "It's better than what we would have gotten from a Big Four review." "I know. Is he coming back?" "Not as an employee," Victoria said. There was a pause. "What does that mean?" Victoria was beginning to think she knew what it meant. She wasn't ready to say it aloud yet. For the next 2 weeks, Nathan worked from his kitchen table. He joined calls when asked, answered questions within the hour, and delivered a revised model that the Meridian Trust team accepted without reservation. He did this between 7 and 9 a.m., before the children woke up, during Rosie's nap, and after 8 p.m., when the house was quiet. He structured it the way he structured everything in his life, around the people who mattered most and with whatever time was left over. Victoria watched this from a professional distance that, over the course of 2 weeks, became noticeably less distant. She began sending him analysis questions that were not strictly necessary. He began answering them in slightly more detail than was strictly required. On the 9th day, one of her messages said, "The year 2, assumptions. Am I reading the underlying logic correctly, or is this assuming flat inflation through Q3? He replied, "You're reading it correctly. That's intentional." The client wanted a conservative base case. The sensitivity table in tab 7 shows the range if you want to model alternate scenarios. Then, after a pause, "You've clearly read the whole thing." She typed back, "I read everything I'm responsible for." He didn't respond for several minutes. Then, "That's a better answer than most CEOs would give." She sat with that for a long time. It was not a compliment exactly. It was an observation from a man who was recalibrating her the same way she had spent weeks recalibrating him. Caleb asked, on a Saturday morning, why the lady from his dad's work kept sending messages. Nathan looked up from the pancakes. "She's not from my work anymore. I don't work there." "Then why does she keep sending stuff?" "Because we're working on a project together." Caleb was 11, and therefore possessed of the specific ability to identify when an adult answer technically answered the question while explaining nothing. He went back to his cereal. Lily, who had been reading at the table, did not look up from her book. "Is she the one who was mean to you?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "She made a mistake." "That's different from being mean." "What's the difference?" He thought about it while he flipped the pancake. "Being mean is a choice you make. Making a mistake is a thing that happens. What matters is what you do with it." Lily considered this with the seriousness she applied to most things. "What is she doing with it?" "Working on it," he said. "I think." Victoria had found the Bridge Financial Technologies story on a Tuesday evening in a feature from a financial technology journal, archived 3 years old. It described the company's founding, its growth, the sale. Buried in the 4th paragraph was a single line. Cole declined a substantial equity stake in the final transaction, citing personal circumstances, a decision that observers estimated cost him between $7 and $12 million. She read the line 3 times. Then she called Marcus Webb, a former colleague who had known the fintech space in 2018. "Nathan Cole," she said when he picked up. "Bridge Financial. What do you remember?" "Smart guy," Marcus said. "Really smart. Could have pushed the sale terms higher. He was the technical architect. The IP was basically his. Walked away from most of his upside right before closing. Do you know why? A pause. His wife was sick, I heard. He wanted to be home. Victoria sat with the phone in her hand long after Marcus hung up. She thought about ambition, how she had always equated it with accumulation, with ascension, with the particular hunger for more that she recognized in herself and used as a measure of other people. She thought about how, for 3 years, she had walked past a man who had chosen, at significant personal cost, to be somewhere specific for someone specific, and she had seen only the position he occupied rather than the choice that had put him there. Ambition, she was beginning to understand, could look like $7 million, or it could look like a man in a kitchen at 6 a.m, making pancakes left-handed without looking while his daughter searched for her other shoe. The Meridian Trust presentation went flawlessly on March 14th. Constance Park, the same analyst who had identified the original error, reviewed the revised model and described it, in writing, as the most rigorous scenario analysis the bank had received from an external consulting firm in 8 years. Victoria sent Nathan a copy of the note. His reply was one line. Tell Sophie Tremblay. She's the one who caught it in time. Victoria forwarded the note to Sophie and thought about that response for longer than was probably warranted. She called a firm-wide meeting on the following Monday. 63 people, the entire Vantex professional staff, plus Greg Paulson, who sat in the front row with the particular expression of a man who suspects this meeting concerns him. Victoria did not lead with the Meridian Trust win. She led with the error. 3 weeks ago, she said, we nearly lost a major client due to a model error that had been flagged repeatedly in writing by a member of our team. That team member's concerns were not heard. When the error surfaced publicly, an attempt was made to redistribute accountability in a way that was not accurate. She paused. I allowed that to happen. I moved to a different agenda item rather than ensuring the record was clear. That was a failure of leadership. The room was very quiet. Derek Shaughnessy has been asked to transition out of his senior consultant role. Accountability at Vantex means something, or it means nothing. It cannot mean something for some people and nothing for others. Afterward, in the hallway, Sophie Tremblay found Victoria and said quietly, He deserves to know you did that. I know, Victoria said. I'm working up to it. She went to his house again. It was a Saturday afternoon, and this time she brought nothing, no file, no agenda, no professional framing prepared in advance. She knocked, and Rosie opened the door again, and this time the girl looked at her with recognition. You came back, Rosie said. Yes, Dad said you might. She stepped back to let Victoria in with the confidence of someone holding the door to their own domain. He made extra coffee. Nathan was at the kitchen table with a laptop open and papers spread around him. He looked up and closed the laptop in the unhurried way of someone who had been expecting company and had prepared, without making a production of the preparation. I have a proposal, Victoria said, sitting down. Not a job offer. A proposal. There's a difference? Yes. She put a single sheet of paper on the table, not a formal document, a handwritten page, because she had decided that whatever this conversation was, it should not begin behind formal documents. Vantex has 3 enterprise clients whose core risk models need to be rebuilt from the ground up. Structural work, 6 months minimum. I want to contract that to an independent firm, your firm. If you want to build one, you would have full methodological authority. No oversight from Derek or anyone like Derek. Direct reporting to me on deliverables, your own timeline, your own structure. Nathan read the page. He had a habit of reading things completely before responding, which was one of the things Victoria had come to recognize as distinctive about how he moved through the world. He read it twice. This is a partnership structure, he said, not a contractor relationship. Yes, that's a significant commitment from Vantex's side. I know what it is. He was quiet for a moment. From somewhere upstairs, there was the sound of Caleb and Lily apparently engaged in a mild disagreement about the rules of a board game. The particular tone of an argument that is generating more noise than heat. "I'd need to register a firm," he said. "I'd need staff, at minimum a junior analyst and an associate, and I'd need a workspace. I can't run client work out of the kitchen indefinitely. Vantex has a floor of office space we're not using since the Chicago team went remote. You can have it at cost." He looked at her. "You've thought about this." "I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks." Something shifted in his face. Not the small shift she'd seen when Rosie called from upstairs, something larger and slower. The movement of something that had been carefully held in one position for a long time, allowing itself to change. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right, I was going to start a firm anyway. I'd already filed the name registration. I had 2 potential clients who reached out through my old network after I left Vantex." He said this without any edge to it. "I'm not telling you because I want leverage. I'm telling you because if we do this, I want it to be honest." "Nathan," she said, and it was the first time she had used only his first name. "You don't need leverage. I'm not here because Vantex needs something from you, although it does. I'm here because—" She stopped. Rosie appeared in the kitchen doorway, having apparently navigated the stairs without anyone noticing. She was holding a stuffed rabbit and wearing the expression of a child assessing a situation she does not fully understand but intends to monitor. She looked at her father. She looked at Victoria. Then she looked at her father again. "Dad," she said, with great seriousness, "is she staying for dinner?" Nathan looked at Rosie, then at Victoria. His expression had the quality of a man who has just watched a 6-year-old ask a question he'd been trying to figure out how to ask himself. "I don't know," he said. "I haven't asked her yet. She stayed for dinner." It was pasta, the same recipe Nathan had made on the night he quit. The olive oil and garlic and cherry tomatoes that had been Diane's, that had become his. He made it without ceremony, while Rosie set the table with the focused energy of someone performing a very important task. And Caleb retrieved the chair from the corner that apparently existed specifically for unexpected guests, and Lily explained to Victoria, who had asked, the rules of the board game they had been arguing about. Victoria Harlan had eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants in 7 countries. She had been to state dinners and industry galas and the kind of private dinner parties where the lighting is professionally managed. She could not, sitting at Nathan Cole's kitchen table with the flickering light on the left side and a stuffed rabbit named Gerald on the chair beside her, immediately account for why this felt different from all of those. The children were not performing for her. That was part of it. They were simply being themselves in their own space, and she was being allowed into it, which was something different from being invited somewhere. Rosie ate 3 cherry tomatoes and then fell asleep without announcement, her head on the table, her fork still loosely held. "This happens," Caleb said, noticing Victoria noticing. "Every time? Most times." He said it with the particular pride of a sibling who has witnessed something often enough to be an authority on it. "Dad says she has a very efficient relationship with consciousness." Victoria looked at Nathan. He had said this with a completely straight face and was now serving himself more pasta. "She asked you a question earlier," Nathan said, after the older 2 had been excused, and Rosie had been carried upstairs with the practiced ease of a man who had performed this specific task approximately 1,000 times. He came back to the table and sat down. "That you didn't answer." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know why I came the first time? The model, the crisis. That was real." "Yes, but I drove myself. I've had a driver for 4 years and I drove myself, and I sat in the car for 6 minutes before I knocked." She looked at her coffee mug. "I don't sit in parked cars." "I know. I'm not." She stopped, started differently. "I am not someone who does this easily, whatever this is. I tend to convert everything into professional categories because professional categories are ones I understand and can manage. You are very difficult to convert into a professional category. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not easy to categorize either. I'm the CEO who didn't learn your last name. You're also the CEO who drove herself to a stranger's house in February and sat at his kitchen table and told 63 people publicly that she got it wrong. A pause. Sophie told me. Of course she did. It mattered, he said, simply. The way he said most things that mattered. Outside, the street was quiet under the amber lights. Inside, the flickering light on the left side of the overhead fixture continued to flicker, as it had for months, as it would presumably continue to do until someone replaced it. I should fix that light, Nathan said, following her gaze. You should, she agreed. I keep meaning to. Maybe you need someone to remind you. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very carefully, maybe I do. It was not a declaration. It was not a promise or a gesture or a moment from a story. It was just a man sitting at his kitchen table in a green sweater with his sleeves pushed up, saying something true in the quiet way he said true things. And a woman sitting across from him deciding to hear it. Cole Risk Analytics was registered as an independent consulting firm on March 22nd. Nathan leased a 3-room office suite on the 4th floor of the Meridian, building a coincidence of address he found quietly funny and did not mention to anyone except Caleb, who did not find it funny but appreciated being told. He hired Sophie Tremblay away from Vantex, which Victoria had both anticipated and accepted as a reasonable consequence. He hired a junior analyst named Patrick Dowd, fresh from a quantitative finance program, who arrived on his first day with a mechanical pencil and a genuine enthusiasm for iterative models that Nathan recognized as the trait most predictive of long-term capability. He put a small, almost aggressively sturdy succulent on the windowsill. He had not replaced it at Vantex, and he thought it was probably still there, on the desk of whoever came after him. He dropped Rosie at school at 8:15 every morning. He was at his desk by 8:40. He picked Rosie up at 3 to 10, worked from the kitchen for 2 hours, and was done by 5:30. He had built a life with architecture, and the architecture was non-negotiable, and everyone who worked with him knew it, and none of them had found it to be a problem. Vantex's partnership contract provided 2/3 of Cole Risk's initial revenue. Victoria ensured the payment terms were favorable and the scope was clearly delineated and there was no ambiguity about who held methodological authority. She did this partly because it was the right structure for the work, and partly because she had spent enough time in Nathan Cole's kitchen to understand that ambiguity was not something he tolerated when it could be resolved. They had dinner on Thursday evenings. This had become true gradually and without announcement. The first time was because she had stayed late reviewing deliverables, and he had said there was leftover pasta. The second time was because Rosie had specifically requested it. By the third time, it was simply a thing that happened on Thursdays. Lily asked Victoria once, on a Thursday in April, whether she was going to be around for a while. Victoria looked at Nathan. He was washing dishes and not looking at her. He had the practiced expression of a man who was very interested in a frying pan. "I think so," Victoria said. "If that's all right." Lily considered this with the seriousness she applied to everything, and then nodded once, with the efficiency of someone who had completed an assessment and recorded the result. "Okay," she said. "You can come to my recital next month then." Victoria had not been to a children's recital since she was approximately the age of the child currently looking at her. She looked at Nathan, who had abandoned the pretense of being interested in the frying pan, and was looking at her with the expression she was still learning to read, the one built from quiet and patience and something that had no professional category. "I'd like that," she said. Later, after the children were in bed and they were sitting on the porch with coffee, a habit they'd acquired as the evenings had grown warmer, he said, "You know you don't have to." "I know. The recital. It's an hour of 9-year-olds playing violin. The third stand violinist is reliably sharp, and there's no way to politely address it." "Nathan." "Yes, I want to go." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right. Above them, the neighborhood was doing the things neighborhoods do at 9 p.m. On a Thursday in April, the distant sound of someone's television through an open window, a dog making its case for the importance of being outside, the amber light from the street lamp that gave everything the quality of a photograph taken slightly before your time. Same street, same house, same porch, different, in every way that mattered. Victoria had arrived the first time with a problem that needed solving, and the professional vocabulary to frame it as something other than what it also was. She had driven herself. She had sat in the car for 6 minutes. She had knocked on a door she did not know, and a small girl in fox pajamas had opened it, and behind the small girl was a photograph on a wall, and a man in a green sweater, and a life that had been built with extraordinary care out of extraordinary difficulty. She was not the CEO who showed up to solve a problem. She had been, when she first knocked. She was less certain that was the whole story now. Nathan picked up his coffee mug. He looked at the street for a moment, a long, quiet look of someone who has sat on this porch many times, with many different kinds of quiet, and was noticing that this particular quiet had a texture he had not felt in a long time. He said, "The light in the kitchen. What about it? I replaced it this morning." Victoria was quiet. Then, "I noticed. I know you did." Somewhere in the house, Professor the cat landed from somewhere high onto something lower, and the sound of it traveled through the walls the way sounds do in small houses, where everything is close enough to be heard and familiar enough to be unremarkable. He had fixed the light. It was not a declaration. It was not a grand gesture. It was a man who had been meaning to do something and had decided, for reasons that were his own and not difficult to understand, that it was time. Same house, same street, same 3 children asleep upstairs, the oldest one with a history project due Monday, the middle one who watched rooms before entering them, the youngest one with an efficient relationship with consciousness, and a stuffed rabbit named Gerald. The same house, but this time the light was fixed, and this time she was on the porch, and neither of them was alone.